Right, hello everyone. I want to talk a little bit about Trump disavowing the alt-right. The first thing I have to say about this is, who on earth is surprised? I mean, really. You have a guy who is now the President-elect of the United States of America. His reputation, everything, all rests upon how he's perceived by the media, the so-called Fourth Estate, which in America is actually protected by the Constitution. So it's quite a serious matter. As we know, the alt-right, the far right, nationalism and all that sort of thing. It isn't politically correct. It isn't accepted by the liberal mainstream, and most people are liberal. Even most Trump supporters are liberal in many politically, in ways of politics and so forth. They wouldn't call themselves nationalists. That's a dirty word, and that's simply just a fact of our age at the present time, just due to how people have been educated, the sorts of information and media they've been surrounded by their entire lives. Old news is old news. What surprises me, though, is the fact that apparently some people are surprised that Trump disavowed the alt-right. I don't think he said disavow. I think it was really, I don't want to energize the alt-right. I think that was the sort of terminology he used. I'll link an article in the description about it for people to read. But there seems to be this kind of naive thread in people's minds, especially in people, people in the alt-right. People in the far right, you could say, generally speaking, tend to extremes. They tend to be very pessimistic or very optimistic. They tend to be very aggressive or totally passive. It's a sign of interior imbalance and chaos, and that marks our age considerably. And people on the right politically are not free from that. They aren't, just because you call yourself a nationalist doesn't mean you are, spiritually kind of a peasant or whatever, or a servant or whatever. That's not a mark of anything really. Just having a political opinion or belief, but actions and actual style of being, they extend beyond opinions. So it is not surprising that people on the alt-right have a tendency to be naive and occasionally immature, and the people who are surprised by this are amid that. Obviously, this all kind of runs off of a recent MPI conference, and the National Policy Institute obviously being the organisation of Richard Spencer, who really mainstreamed, or what's the word I'm looking for, popularised the usage of the term alt-right to describe, in short, American white nationalism and the kind of, populist or racialist or whatever energies surrounding American white nationalism. But they had a conference, and I think Spencer ended the speech with "Hail Trump, hail our people, and hail victory." Who fucking would have thought that liberals and lefties and all the rest would be shocked and appalled? Of course they will be. Just because Trump is president-elect doesn't mean the zeitgeist has immediately shifted rightwards. It has, and it is shifting rightwards slowly. But that isn't because of politics. That's because of kind of, social, economic, and external political events, like the migrant crisis, like Islamic terrorism, etc. Just bring Joe Owens up, because Joe Owens, a veteran English nationalist, or British nationalist, I should say, has recently made a couple of videos criticising MPI and Spencer and so forth. Owens thinks Spencer and co are spies, which I think is silly, but Owens is wrong on what causes people to change their minds about politics. It isn't knocking on people's doors. In our age of mass information, mass communication, mass media, people respond to what they read on the news, and their social groups, their peers, what they know around them. That's how people change their opinions to fit into their social groups and their peers, what's morally acceptable or proper or mannered, subjective to their classmates at university and whatnot. not through reason, debate, and discussion, and exposure to the facts. That comes later. People accept information at the intellectual level after the fact that they accept it on the emotional level. People prime themselves psychologically for things which actually happen at a later date. So you will find that your opinions will change as your emotional barriers are pulled down, or your irrational barriers are pulled down, and that opens you to other possibilities. It isn't so much that, I heard this fact and therefore my opinion changed. That's true in cases of rational and rigorous debate. And there are genuinely some people who are that, straight to the point, whereby a fact will change their opinion just like that, and it's as easy as that without any bullshit getting in the way. But most human beings aren't like that. Most human beings are, they are the masses, they are the mass men. They are led, they are controlled, essentially. Well, not controlled, but they can be controlled. But they're told what to do, ultimately, influenced by their surroundings, to a greater degree than they influence themselves. That's the nature of most human beings, including in the right. But, so it's no wonder that Trump will disavow the alt-right, because the zeitgeist is still in the process of being changed. It isn't a right-wing zeitgeist. The news media is still left-wing, humanist, globalist, whatever. Those people still have immense power all over the world. And obviously it's confined, or not confined, but centralized in the West, in the Occident. You have this sort of global financial ideology. This kind of bourgeois capitalist mentality. We know where it comes from, we know its adherents, we know all that. That's still the main matrix through which politics, etc. operates. And that's facilitated and allowed by progressive philosophy. You'll notice that liberal kind of humanist types, hippies, if you like, modern hippies, are the best capitalists because they're the best consumers. Once you remove all metrics of religion, of culture, of race, of language, once you deconstruct all these things, you're left with nothing but money. And that's the only language these people speak, and that's globalism. That's why the EU can be left-wing philosophically, but right-wing or capitalistic, or corporatist, we should say, which is a right-wing, if you want to deal with that kind of viewpoint, economically, politically. So, anyway, the people who are surprised by Trump doing this, I mean, there's no hope for you, honestly. That's retarded. The fact that people are getting cocky, right-wingers, alt-righters are getting cocky about, oh yeah, we beat the globalists, the white race is going to be saved, this sort of silly talk. It's hot air. You're getting cocky because there's been a moment of hope. And people are so used to being on the defensive, right-wingers particularly, are so used to being on the defensive and the submissive, that all of a sudden they have a chance not to do that. And they turn the dial up to 1,000,000 instantly, instead of being reasonable or realistic. It is not a case of being pessimistic and then optimistic. It's a case of being realistic in either respect. And it's funny because you have this odd juxtaposition whereby even on very well-known alt-right websites like The Right Stuff, which is a great website, I encourage people to read it, a lot of the stuff there is great, you have people being quite rational, quite realistic, quite sensible. And at the same time at the MPI conference, you have this kind of very naive optimism, to the point where, even if it's tongue-in-cheek, people are kind of pulling the right arm salute and so on. And I know most of it is tongue-in-cheek, but some of it isn't. Spencer mentioning the white people being the children of the sun and this sort of thing. It's partly tongue-in-cheek, it partly isn't. In fact, I would wager Spencer would say that isn't tongue-in-cheek at all. But when you start to get into these sorts of phrasing and this sort of language, this sort of mental and psychological and emotional approach to the reality around you, you're setting yourself up for failure, because the world as it is still is fucked. You know, you can dare to dream and be positive. You can be upbeat. You can be, creative and search for a will to power, etc. But that cannot translate into naivety. Trump disavowing the alt-right just after this recent MPI conference really does say it all. Trump is going to centralise on a lot of his positions, a lot of the things he's said over the campaign trail. In my opinion, I think he is a very honest man, and he would genuinely like to do a lot of the things, or most, if not all of the things, he said he wants to do over the campaign trail over the past year and a bit. But the reality of that level of politics is that it isn't that straightforward. So he's just going to have to concede on certain things. I think today there have been rumours floating around that he's going to pardon Hillary Clinton or not pursue charging her. I think he should, but it wouldn't surprise me if he wouldn't or didn't, because the nature of that level of politicking is as such, whereby you have other things to focus upon. You have to deal with a million things at once. And is it worth it? Would it be worth it for him to do that? You and I don't know the details of what's going on interiorly in the campaign, in the transition. Who's going where, who's appointed to who, to what. That's just the nature of the thing. Trump is not a dictator. The United States, by its very nature, is not a dictatorship. The president has very limited powers. That's just the way it goes. So, just to finalise, a bit rambly here, I know, apologies. But I think people being naive, no. Be of course realistic and be positive. You don't want to go full common filth and fucking throw yourself into a kind of pit of psychological neurosis and depression. That isn't good. But we have to find a kind of the sensible kind of middle ground between what can often be a pessimistic reality and a potentially optimistic reality. So, any last thoughts on that? No, not really. It speaks for itself, really. People who watch my channel will be of a more, I suppose, traditionalist bent, so we don't have much faith in party politics anyway. But I would advise people, just regarding Trump, etc., we are a long, long, long way from anything ideal governmentally. And that also translates to people individually being a long, 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 long way away from virtue in our own lives. The point though is to get on the fucking road. It's not to worry about it or to lament the length of the road or to think it'll be easy, but to be realistic, and to do well in one's own life and expect the same of others. And I think Trump will be a fine president. Regarding the politics of the situation, given what the hand that the Trump team has been given, I think they'll do fine. I don't think anything really bad will happen. I think Trump will be a decent president at the very least. But he's not the second coming of Augustus Caesar. So, hey, I'll shut up now. Thank you for listening.